Once the final month of his contract had started, Joey found out that he was unable to get any downtime at all. Between the occasional repairs to the ship and, of course, all the constant harassment of the crew, along with being pulled in for his additional duties, he was beginning to look even worse than when he was fixing the ship. Walking through, barely able to stand, many times barely able to stay conscious, a few times found unconscious on the floor, drug right into the aid station, and of course, the doc does what she does and fixes him right up. And then before he realized what's going on, he's on to his more additional duties. Thankfully, after a few days of being unconscious, the captain was finally able to return to her duty, and seeing Joey's condition, she gave him one full day of rest and recuperation. Of course, this upset the crew to absolutely no end, but she did look at the timeline, and through some simple calculation, she believed that if she did not keep Joey on a strict schedule for his additional duties, then not all the crew members would be able to get their own personal time. Joey was spending too much time with each one, it seemed, but he always makes sure he finished the job. Of course, he did the job well because, of course, humans have a reputation. The captain had to be firm in her stance and then immediately started implementing the timeline protocols. She believed that Joey would be able to take care of everything he needed to, considering he did such a good job repairing the ship. And it's not a surprise since humans do have a reputation. With this, the XO finally got her day with Joey. Well, day is an understatement. After 31 hours later, Joey left her quarters, and with that, he was carrying the XO into the infirmary. The amphibious XO looked like she had been held a little too tight. As it turns out, the amphibious nature meant that when they are doing such activities, the females are usually squeezed by the males. This has something to do with the release of eggs, and also to help out with the more fun part of the experience. However, the XO underestimated the insane arm strength of humans compared to her own species, which far exceeded the limits of her males. This meant that when she was brought in and examined by the doc found several broken ribs, damaged organs, a couple messed up ligaments. It was completely messed up. And with that, she could not stop still feeling the immense pleasure of what had happened before. It took several doses of muscle relaxers before that actually stopped. The doc had her tentacles filled with such an abundance of things she had to take care of. More crew members were unable to return to duty because of incidents like this. Joey would finally get a day off, though, and when he did, he locked himself inside his quarters. He brought food in from the galley and was hoping to get some rest and relaxation, wanting to just sleep in his own bed after a quick shower. But no, of course not. Arguments would immediately break out amongst the crew, and fights too. Fights were so violent in some cases that they would bang against the bulkhead themselves with enough pressure that even Joey himself would jump out of his seat. And unfortunately, because of the way everything was set up, he would end up smacking his head against the top of the bunk. This was not exactly relaxing, but he would immediately throw himself back to sleep. What he didn't know is that the majority of fights were over his old coveralls, which were, at this point, used to be simply, well, sniffed, for lack of a better term. Many of the species find this very interesting, and it definitely gets the body moving. With that, they would simply go in and want to have a minute or two of just sticking their face inside of this and seemingly get as much stimulation as possible, and then go to their own quarters to finish what they had started. However, it got to the point that many of them would try and steal the coveralls, and because of that, when they got overly interested in what they were doing, they would spray their own scent on it, and this was becoming an area of contention. Occasionally, The bangs on the bulkheads got so bad that even Joey would just say, "Screw it, I'm awake." Along with his additional duties, Joey still had to go every single day and check to see if there were any issues. He worried that some were going to begin to break something inside their own quarters to try and draw him in and then simply do something else. The captain had to put a stop to this immediately after the first crew member tried this, jumping the line so that she could have her fun time. However, seeing that this had worked, the amount of crew members that started breaking things, in fact, breaking essential systems, well, damaging them enough where Joey had to show up, was so bad that 4 crew members found themselves in the brig, although not at the same time. Once everyone found out that the captain was not dealing with their bullshit, things seemed to calm down a little bit. Nearing the end of his contract, Joey was glad that they would be reaching space dock soon, thinking at one point, only 2 days to go, basically one day and a wake up, okay. The last days were always busy, and there was no visitations scheduled. However, due to the time constraints of dealing with each of them, there was only one crewmate left, the insectoid that usually worked in the galley, and when she didn't work in the galley, she worked up in the bridge. She was not totally interested, as Joey didn't have a carapace, and that was usually her big deal. However, she was curious, as most of all the crew was singing his praises. In some cases, singing it so loud that you could hear it echoing down the hallway from outside their quarters. So she was curious and figured, what's the big deal? The captain made sure all repair requests go through her, of course, to make sure nobody again jumped the line and pulled this. She gave some alone time to the final crewmate on the day before docking. A few of the crew would wonder if the humans was going to be able to help out the insectoid with any of her issues, and they wondered if she would actually enjoy the experience. This was a main question that went around the entire ship, at least for an hour or so, until they heard something. It was almost like a human opera being sung, and then as it went into different pitches over and over and over again, they realized, yes, she did enjoy her visit. With only one day left before they finally reached the space station, now that they were within visual and sensor range, everyone made sure that they packed all their gear, as they believed that they were not going to be on this ship. They might be assigned another one, they didn't know. They also had to double check the cargo, make sure everything was latched down strongly, because for this while they've been using their own artificial gravity, but once they entered the space dock, they had to deal with the space dock's artificial gravity. This would lead to a lot of issues if any of the cargo just decided to shift suddenly. In some cases, it can actually send a ship tumbling into the docking bay, and then there would be bigger problems. They also began to get the supply list completed. They were wondering why this. Aren't they supposed to get a new ship? Once they got ready for deceleration, everybody began to strap in, as the maneuvers tend to be a bit violent, especially with a patchwork ship. Even those on the other side of the comms were trying not to say it, but inside their voice were very nervous, as they had seen patchwork ships come in and completely lose control as they began to enter the space dock itself. But because of the repairs, it was amazingly smooth. Those inside the radio tower were even surprised as they saw this patchwork ship made of 4, was it 5? Was it 6? They couldn't tell from the outside, but it was all different pieces, yet it flew like it came out of space dock as one ship. It began to dock, just simply landing, and then got ready to offload. The offloading was also much, much easier now that they had fully functioning doors. Many of the crew were amazed at this as they started to go into the dockyard. They expected to be jolted against their restraints, but no, everything was nice and easy. And then they realized all the repairs that Joey had done, and they realized that he had truly lived up to his potential. Well, he does have a reputation. The dockyard crews were even surprised, not just the tower, but the dockyard crews usually hid behind a blast wall waiting for the ship to come in. A patchwork ship has, again, a tendency to crash in, but they were surprised how slow and smooth and easy it landed. The dockyard crew expected a standard mess in the cargo bays, and again were surprised as everything was clean, organized, prepped, and ready to be offloaded. How was this happening? What? How did they do this? Was all the area of conversation, but nobody really cared as they got to work. They were, however, really surprised to see a human in an exosuit too. The human, even though humans are known to be quite strong, was able to grab huge items and move them seemingly without any effort, and simply move them in and out with ease. Although this was usually helped out with a repulsor lift cart, which, once the boxes were on, were easy to maneuver around. The dockyard crews wanted to use that exosuit, as the suits they were using were able to do the job, but they seemed more sluggish, not as strong. And yet they could see human tech, which was usually considered impressive but not that good, just moving so easily. Huh. Maybe humans do have a reputation they can live up to. When the ship was almost completely offloaded, Joey walked over to the captain, pulling out his data pad, expecting her to sign off on his contract. He was surprised, however, to see a non-suited human in front of her. But then he looked and he saw another one. With this, his heart sunk down to his bunghole as he worried. He was hoping that they all remembered what he had told them aboard the ship. Back when Joey was dealing with his additional duties, between sessions, the ladies would always have questions for him, as most of them didn't quite know all that much about him. He usually kept to himself, but now they wanted to know, especially since this human had done things that they didn't even think was possible, not the least of which was fixing this tub that they're flying in. While Joey was, as he put it, waiting to chamber another round, the ladies would always ask, "Is this why you were selected to be posted here, or on the ass end of nowhere to do this sort of thing?" He explains the situation in detail to each of them, making sure not to miss anything and always say the same thing to each of them so they know he's not bullshitting them. He mentioned how he was posted on a freighter before, a massive human freighter. Many of these freighters have brand new personnel, and these personnel are evaluated. If they do well, they could work their way up to a battleship, or in some cases, they would be able to work their way up into the civilian sector, into jobs that would bring them a lot of money. As he was trying to get a reputation behind him, he was always on his grind, the same way he was when he was working on the patchwork ship. However, just like throughout human history, if you are the one that is on your grind and always pushing forward, everybody who is sitting there partying, which he did not, or drinking, and he was not, would end up catching a lot of flack from the rest of the crew. They would always say, "You're making us look bad." And he would always respond with, "I'm not the one making you look bad." And then he would go back to what he was doing. If he wasn't working, he was training, not only physically, but also mentally, going through each of the courses over and over again, increasing his skill base. He started getting requests in person by the command crew. This cannot be underestimated by any stretch of the imagination. If you are being constantly requested by the command crew to help out with their issues, then they're evaluating you to see if you are good enough as your reputation precedes you. And if you do, then your next posting will be exemplary. Even halfway through his 2-year tour on that tub, he was already getting recommendations. He already had the certifications, but he had everything he needed and passed the prerequisite tests, as he already would have a job lined up, and this job was going to pay exceptionally well. This was not going to be the pinnacle of what he was going to do, of course, but it would pay exceptional, which meant that he would only have to be up in space for about a decade, maybe two, and he will be set for all of eternity. However, what stopped him was a coworker. This female would constantly be messing with him, trying to degrade him, trying to get him to, as she said, just lighten up. It was just a joke. Come play with us. And all that other stuff. Though he would end up professionally just either ignoring her or simply moving on to the next task. He stayed on task and stayed on his grind. And then, seeing that she could not get under his skin or get him to pay attention, she began to speak poorly about his performance. Of course, she was not outranking him, but she had another way of getting these performance reviews in. Others could see his work and were not agreeing with him and would not send this above, so she had other ways, starting with forcing her work on him so she could go relax. She believed that if he couldn't get hers done, she had another way of ripping into him, and then he wouldn't be able to get his stuff done. She was wrong. He would simply forgo food and sleep and just continue to go as hard as he could until his body would be on the edge of collapse, without being able to stop him by overworking him. She went on to her more feminine Wild's way of doing things, as she tried to tease him. This didn't work, as he was staying a solid professional, speaking in a monotone the entire time whenever he spoke to her. This made her more and more anxious, as she tried to flirt even more, and again he stayed professional. She was no longer just opening up her own coveralls, exposing herself with just little peeks and whatnot, but now she was openly saying things. But now, since he was professional, she had to push it up. She then finally presented herself, and this was in a way that had zero ambiguity, as she showed up next to his room without any clothing at all. He professionally rejected her, not once, but twice, as she stood there without any type of coverings at all. Seeing this fail, she went to her next option, was that of a woman scorned. She immediately started sending complaints up to the next chain of command. However, the next chain of command found absolutely nothing as they went in. They could see that not only was she presenting herself, but they could hear all the things she was saying. They immediately told her to knock off the bullshit. As for the fact, if Joey wanted to bring up some sort of complaint, he could. So she pulled on the last rope she had, and this was a very large rope or chain or whatever it might be. She went to her mother crying and bitching up a storm about Joey. Her mother just happened to be the captain. Oh, this made things difficult for Joey, as the captain immediately took her side and held a captain's mast against Joey. Though many of his chain of command were ready to stand up for him, they were all told to be silent. They were not allowed to speak during any of this, meaning that he had no one to corroborate his story, and magically all the evidence disappeared as well. With this, all the recommendations and all the positive reviews and everything else was lost or destroyed. The only thing that showed up was the one or two complaints that the coworker had actually written. This was infuriating to him, as he had just lost the new contract. It was gone completely. This evil captain had not only got a hold of her company, but all the other companies as well, stating how bad of a person he was, how he was a risk to all of them, no matter what, and that he should never work at any of their companies ever. Ever. Though Joey immediately sent up his own version, which actually stated everything and said how all the data had been magically lost, it was still his word against the captain of the ship, and he still had another year to sit there. The coworker, after Joey had been punished, held all this over his head, constantly gloating, yet she still continued to flirt. She used him as a pack mule and everything else, the red-headed stepchild of the ship. He was constantly degraded from her and made sure that he was degraded from the rest of the crew, as the coworker made sure that everyone realized that if they went against her, they would face a similar fate. The fear of reprisal was enough for most to not say anything while they were on the ship. They knew that if they said one simple thing, they were done as well. At the end of that contract, his demotions were so bad, his options were excessively limited. His posting and contracts were immediately rejected, and no one wanted him. Yet he would find one that went out into the outskirts of the middle of nowhere. The pay is okay, but it was posted on a ship that wouldn't have any support. He was the only engineer, and the ship needed massive refits, which meant he would not stop working for weeks. The ship itself was on a multi-year mission. Though nearing the end of its mission, it desperately required an engineer. The only issue was it couldn't come into space dock for another 6 months, which meant he would have to be sent out there, get a transport, and be on the tiny little tub of a ship that would end up docking with it. As he was going through, he found out that the crew had been out there for so long, and again, had not dealt with humans, though they knew all about them. And they knew that humans had a reputation. He knew that he had to upend his reputation to make sure that those who looked at his chart thought that he just screwed up once and that was all. Though on the trip there, he had steeled himself. He's not going to do anything to damage his reputation, not at all. Because if he does, if he screws up the slightest little bit, if any report finds out that he is dealing with the crew in an unprofessional manner at all, his life is over. It wouldn't matter how good he works on the ship, no. He would be done. All the work that he had done, all the grinding that he had been doing for his entire life would be just thrown away, and he couldn't do that. The idea just made his blood boil and then run cold. It ran cold as he approached the humans, because not only could he see a man that he just didn't know, he could also see his previous co-worker standing there. When she saw him coming, she turned and looked with a smug grin on her face, as though she was finally going to get exactly what she wanted. It was like a cat looking into a fishbowl that was low on water. Joey walked up and didn't look at either human, and simply handed over the data pad to the captain. Offloading should be complete in the next 40 hours. Reloading will begin 2 hours afterwards. He made sure, while saying this, he didn't look at the humans at all, and as soon as she double-checked and gave her version of a nod, he took the pad and began to walk away. That is when the man turned and called him his full name. Joey, still in his full suit, turns and looks at him. The man introduces himself as Mr. Tyrone and then shakes Joey's hand. As Mr. Tyrone explains that he is an evaluator, Joey makes sure he doesn't even acknowledge that his former co-worker is standing there. This seems to get on her nerves a bit. Mr. Tyrone then addressed the captain. Ma'am, as a representative of the Noir Shipping Company, I have come to do a follow-up assessment. I need to assess your crew member in order to ascertain the level of competency as an engineer, and as a member of your crew, of course. The co-worker chimed in. And his status as a man, of course. The captain. Who are you? The co-worker introduces herself with a slick smile. The captain ignores her attempted handshake, and then turns back to the man. Perhaps his competency was much better if you'd shown, yes? She then motioned towards the ship. If you would follow me to my ship, I will gladly show you everything he has done, and done extremely well. As she walked, the 3 humans were behind her. Joey could see that she was wagging her tail. Mr. Tyrone keeps his professional demeanor as he looks over to the datapad. as though he is double-checking the work of those before him. The co-worker, still smug, but now is a little insulted by the captain, is walking behind her. Joey, still inside his suit and is grateful nobody can hear him talk unless he wants them to, is sweating bullets thinking the exact same thing that someone would be thinking if a cop had just pulled them over and they would just come from the bar. I'm fucked, I'm fucked, I'm fucked, I'm fucked, I'm fucked, I'm fucked, I'm fucked.